You don't get manipulated because you're weak. You get manipulated because your reactions are predictable. And once someone can predict your reaction, they don't need to force you anymore. They just guide you. Most people imagine manipulation as something obvious, something aggressive, something you can clearly see coming. But the truth is much quieter than that. It happens in small moments, a pause that feels too long, a sentence that sounds slightly off, a tone that makes you question yourself, and before you realize it, you're already adjusting, explaining, fixing something that was never actually broken. That's the part most people miss. Manipulation doesn't start when someone controls you. It starts when you begin to control yourself to avoid discomfort. You fill silence because it feels awkward. You explain more because you want to be understood. You respond quickly because you don't want tension to build. And each of those reactions feels normal, reasonable, even polite. But taken together, they form a pattern, and patterns are predictable. And predictable people are easy to influence, not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack strength, but because their system runs automatically, without pause, without space, without questioning what's actually happening. Now here's where it gets interesting. There are people who almost never fall into this loop. They still feel pressure. They still notice tension, but they don't rush to remove it. They don't react instantly. They don't hand over control in those small invisible moments. And the difference is not personality, it's structure. They follow a different internal system. One that slows things down just enough to see clearly before responding. And once you see that difference, you stop asking why certain people get into your head. And you start seeing exactly how they got there in the first place. Think about how a normal day actually unfolds. You sit down to work, open your laptop, and within minutes your attention is already split. A few tabs open, messages waiting, a task you plan to finish somehow still incomplete. Then a conversation happens, something small, maybe just a sentence, maybe just a tone, and it lingers. Longer than it should, you replay it. You wonder if you said something wrong. You start adjusting your response in your head, adding more detail, softening your words, trying to make sure everything sounds right. And suddenly your focus is gone. Not because the situation was important, but because your system reacted to it automatically. This is where most people misunderstand what's happening. They think they're distracted, or too emotional, or not disciplined enough. But the real issue is deeper than that. Your brain is designed to remove discomfort as quickly as possible. Not to understand it, not to analyze it, just to make it go away. Silence feels uncomfortable, so you fill it. Tension feels uncomfortable, so you explain. Uncertainty feels uncomfortable, so you rush to resolve it. And each time you do that, you train your system to react faster the next time. That's the loop. And manipulators don't need to control you directly. They just introduce small triggers into that loop. A delayed reply, a vague comment, a subtle shift in behavior. Your system takes over from there. It fills in the gaps, creates meaning, pushes you to respond, to fix, to adjust. And the more you do it, the more predictable your reactions become. So the problem isn't that you're weak, it's that your responses are automatic. Your system is built for short-term relief, not long-term clarity. And until that system changes, the same patterns will keep repeating quietly, consistently, in ways that are easy to miss but hard to escape. The shift begins with a small realization. Control is not about what you say. It's about when you choose to respond. Most people believe they need better words, better arguments, better explanations. But none of that matters if the reaction happens too fast. Because the moment you react instantly, you're no longer choosing your response. You're following a pattern. There's a simple principle in behavioral science. Between what happens and how you respond, there is a gap. And inside that gap is your only real leverage. The problem is, most people never use it. Something happens, a message, a tone, a pause, and the reaction comes immediately. Your emotional system takes over, your thinking system steps back, and everything that follows becomes predictable. But when you slow that process down, even slightly, something different happens. Silence stops feeling like pressure and starts becoming information. Discomfort stops being something to escape and becomes something to observe. And emotions stop controlling the outcome and start becoming signals you can interpret. This is how grounded people operate. They don't rush to fix the moment. They allow the moment to exist without immediately reacting to it. And in that space, they start to notice things most people miss. Inconsistencies in what was said, shifts in tone that don't match the words, patterns that repeat across different situations, not because they are trying harder, but because they are not reacting faster. And that's the turning point. You don't need to become more confident, more assertive, or more dominant. You need to create space. Because the moment you stop reacting on impulse, you stop being predictable. And the moment you stop being predictable, you stop being easy to influence. Instead of trying to control every situation, build a simple system that controls how you respond. Not complicated, not perfect, just consistent. Step 1, create a pause whenever you feel pressure, urgency, or a subtle emotional push. Don't respond immediately. Take a slow breath in, then a slow breath out. Just a few seconds, but enough to interrupt the automatic reaction. This small pause does something important. It shifts you from reacting to choosing. Step 2, reduce what you say. Most people think clarity comes from explaining more. But in reality, the more you explain, the more room you create for confusion, pressure, and manipulation. So instead, use one sentence, short, direct, and complete. No extra justification, no long reasoning. No trying to be understood by someone who already decided how they see you. Just a clear response, and then stop. Step 3, delay decisions when needed. If someone pushes you to answer immediately, especially when it feels urgent or emotionally charged, step back, use a simple line. Let me think about that. I'll get back to you. This does two things at once. It gives you space to think, and it breaks the urgency that the other person is relying on. Now imagine a simple stick figure in a conversation. Before it leans forward, reacts quickly, talks too much, tries to smooth everything out. Now it stands still. It pauses before speaking. It responds with fewer words, and when things feel unclear, it takes a step back instead of moving closer. From the outside, nothing dramatic changes, but internally, the system is completely different. It's no longer driven by discomfort. It's guided by control. And that's the key. You don't need more effort. You need a better structure. Something simple enough to repeat. Something stable enough to rely on. Something you can start using today without overthinking it. When you apply this system consistently, the change doesn't feel dramatic. It feels quiet. You don't suddenly become a different person. You don't win every interaction. And you don't eliminate every difficult situation. But something subtle starts to shift. You stop carrying conversations long after they end. You stop replaying small moments in your head, trying to fix what didn't need fixing. You stop explaining yourself to people who were never trying to understand you in the first place. And because of that, your mental energy starts to return. Not all at once, but gradually. You feel less drained at the end of the day. Less scattered when you try to focus. Less frustrated with yourself for reacting in ways you didn't intend. Over time, your baseline becomes calmer. Not because life is easier, but because your responses are more stable. And people notice this. Even if they don't say it directly, you become harder to rush, harder to pressure, harder to read in predictable ways. And that changes how others interact with you, because manipulation depends on patterns. And when those patterns disappear, so does the leverage. But the most important change is internal. You start trusting your own responses again. You don't feel the need to constantly adjust, justify, or second-guess yourself. Your boundaries become clearer. Not louder, just more consistent. And that consistency builds something most people are missing. A sense of control that doesn't come from force, but from stability. This is where real productivity begins. Not in doing more, not in pushing harder, but in protecting your energy so it can be used where it actually matters. Less reaction, more intention, less noise, more clarity, and over time, those small shifts compound into something steady, something reliable, something you can actually build on. You don't need to become stronger to stop being manipulated. You need to become less predictable in how you respond. Most people spend years trying to fix their emotions, trying to feel more confident, more certain, more in control. But emotions are not the problem. The system behind them is. When your system is built on reacting quickly, avoiding discomfort, and explaining everything, you will always feel slightly off balance, not because something is wrong with you, but because your responses are happening before your thinking has time to catch up. But when you change that system, even in small ways, everything starts to feel different. You pause instead of rushing. You say less instead of over-explaining. You step back instead of getting pulled in. And over time, those small shifts create a version of you that feels calmer, clearer, and more grounded. Not perfect, not uncheckable, just stable. And stability is what protects your confidence, your boundaries, and your peace. So you don't need a new personality. You don't need to become cold or distant. You just need a system that works with your mind instead of against it. Start simple, pause before you respond. If this pattern feels familiar, comment system. And if you want to build a calmer, more intentional way of thinking and working, subscribe each week. We refine one small part of your system until your days feel lighter, your focus feels clearer, and your energy goes exactly where it matters most. You don't need to become a different person to stop being manipulated. You need a different system for how you respond. Most people try to fix their emotions. They try to feel more confident, more certain, more in control. But emotions are fast, and anything fast is easy to influence. So the real shift is not in how you feel. It's in how you handle the moment before you act on that feeling. When you pause, even briefly, you take back control. When you say less, you protect your position. When you step back, you give yourself space to see clearly, and none of this is dramatic. None of this requires willpower all day. It's just a few small adjustments repeated consistently over time. Those small adjustments change how you experience everything. Conversations feel lighter, decisions feel clearer, and your energy is no longer constantly pulled in different directions. You stop trying to manage other people's reactions, and you start managing your own system instead. That's the difference. You don't need to win every interaction. You just need to stop losing control of your response. So start with one thing, pause before you reply. If you've ever caught yourself over-explaining or reacting too fast, comment system. And if you want to build a calmer, more focused way of thinking and working, subscribe each week. We simplify one part of your system until everything feels more stable, more intentional, and easier to manage.